Hey, how's it going, captains? Admiral Tori here, and welcome aboard for another World of Warships video on my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about the upcoming Tier 8 Premium American Aircraft Carrier, the USS Enterprise, CV-6, one of the few aircraft carriers that survived the conflict. She was part of the Yorktown-class carrier. She was the highest decorated American warship out of World War II, earning 20 hard-fought battle stars, the Presidential Unit Citation, Navy Unit Commendation, American Defense Service Medal, American Campaign Medal, Asiatic Pacific Campaign Medal, World War II Victory Medal, Philippine Presidential Unit Citation, and the Philippine Liberation Medal. This is the ship that a lot of Americans wanted pretty badly. This is the most famous warship out of World War II. And in general, she is one of the most famous ships in the United States Navy. Although she isn't as prestigious in terms of the length of her service because she only fought during World War II, while you compare something like the USS Nimitz, which pretty much served all the way to this day, over half a century, the Enterprise is probably the most talked American aircraft carrier. She was born and fought in a time where the aircraft carrier was brand new. She fought one of the hardest battles during World War II. She engaged the Battle of Midway. She was brought out of the dry docks after receiving repairs at a inhuman rate, which kind of brought the Japanese into surprise. The Japanese thought they sunk the Enterprise a couple of times, but it turns out she was never sunk. She was viewed as the ghost ship to the Japanese. She has earned a lot of legendary reputation, stories, and beyond doubt, she is probably the most well-known United States Navy ship ever been built. Thus this far, next to the USS Constitution. So, let's talk about what I'm going to be expecting from the Enterprise. Now, of course, this is, you can kind of feel that this connection as an American who's talking about this ship. And of course, I know that there are plenty of viewers who are not from the United States would not feel that connection, and I can understand that. But I guess I can talk about more towards the aspects of World of Warship, what to expect from it, before I can, get into the topic about what makes the Enterprise special. Because I think most people out here are just kind of curious of how the Enterprise would play in this game. So, Tier 8, she's going to be pitted against the Tier 8 Japanese aircraft carrier, which is the Shokaku. Shokaku is really the Japanese version of the Enterprise, or more specifically, I think I hear more about the Zuikaku, which is the sister ship to the Shokaku. So Shokaku and Zuikaku, they also survived pretty far into the war compared to any other Japanese carrier. They are pretty much the equivalent version of the Enterprise. So she's going to be facing the Shokaku, and she also is going to be facing the Tier 8 American aircraft carrier, the USS Lexington. Now, her planes. As far as I know with the planes, I believe that the Enterprise is going to have something very similar to the Japanese premium Tier 7 aircraft carrier, which is the Kaga. Now, why did I say that? Well, Kaga, if you look at her competitor, which is the Hiryu and the Ranger, those two carriers have a carrier capacity of 72 planes. Now, there was also the Saipan, but let's not talk about the Saipan, because Saipan is a different story. It is an absolutely different story when it comes to balance. But the Kaga, when the Kaga is going to be released, of course, she has the unique characteristic of having a large hangar capacity, and she's able to use much more planes compared to the Hiryu and Ranger. So what Wargaming did to balance the Kaga is that they gave Kaga Tier 6 planes, which means that the Kaga planes are going to be shut down pretty easily, but that is balanced with the fact that the Kaga is a huge aircraft carrier with a huge amount of reserves of planes. Now, the Yorktown class carriers carry more planes than the Lexington. In this case, the USS Enterprise carried 90 planes compared to the Lexington and Shokaku, which carry 72 planes. So one of the screenshots I saw was that the Enterprise definitely does not have the Corsairs, which is the fighters that you can find on the Enterprise. The plane they have seems to be, from the image, is the F-6F Hellcat, and that is the Tier 7 Rangers fighter fully upgraded. So I'm going to be expecting that the Enterprise is going to be playing somewhat similar to the Kaga in terms of the position. So Kaga, Tier 7, has a huge hangar capacity, but to balance it out, she's going to have Tier 6 planes. Enterprise, bigger hangar capacity compared to the Lexington and the Shokaku, so she's going to have, most likely, Tier 7 planes in terms of the fighter, which I can confirm from the teaser. Now keep in mind, Wargaming is going to change it possibly. Anything is possible, so we never know. Now of course, that questions the bombers and questions the loadout, questions how her torpedo bombers and all that stuff. The bombers, I'm going to expect her to have Tier 8 bombers, and the reason why I say that is because the Enterprise has the 1944 configuration. And at this time, the Americans were using the 1,000-pound bombs. Even beginning of the war, they were using it against the Japanese. So I'm going to be expecting her to have a lot of dive bombers, similar to the Strike Lexington. Now keep in mind, if you don't know anything about the American doctrine when it comes to aircraft carriers, Americans don't emphasize torpedo bombers. And one of the biggest reasons why the torpedo bombers was not emphasized in their doctrine, which is why the American carriers in the current state only has one torpedo bomber, is because Americans view that dive bombers are far more effective than torpedo bombers. At the same time, it's harder to strike a ship with torpedo bombers because you got to properly pretty much figure out your pathway to your target. You can't just attack the target head on. You got to prepare your path of attack. Dive bombers is much easier to set up. At the same time, you have a higher chance of survival compared to torpedo bombers. Torpedo bombers have to fly very low, while dive bombers can fly at high altitudes to avoid the anti-air and then dive in with the dive bomb. Now, of course, what sinks ships? Making a hole on the side of the hull and pretty much leak the ship to death, or putting a hole on the deck. And that is pretty much torpedo bombers will sink ships. When you put a huge hole onto the deck, the best thing you can do against a ship is to disable it, which the Americans did during the Battle of Midway against the Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. They did not sink the Japanese carriers. The Japanese scuttled the ship, which a lot of people got the misconception that the Americans sunk the aircraft carrier. No, they actually jammed the rudder, and these ships were pretty much disabled. And the only option was to scuttle the ship, because you don't want the enemies to have your own ship, or at least haul it back to the port and figure out what you have in your ship. Same thing goes with the Americans. A lot of the American ships that were lost during the early parts of war were pretty much, some of them were actually disabled and were forced to be scuttled. I believe the USS Yorktown and Hornet were scuttled by American destroyers or torpedoes from their submarines. Same goes with the Japanese, but something like the Lexington, I believe the Lexington was sunk by torpedo and dive bombers. So in this case, the Americans will most likely going to be using a lot of dive bombers. Whether you like it or not, I think dive bombers are a nice choice. But there are problems with dive bombers, and I'm going to have to get to that part on the other half of this video. Furthermore, in terms of the loadout, and that is probably the hardest, speculation I can talk about, because Tier 8 Lexington, we're talking about American carriers, so you're going to be expecting some similarities with the Lexington. Tier 8 Lexington, her strike loadout is going to have 1 torpedo bomber and 3 dive bomber. Her air superiority loadout is going to have 2 fighters and 2 dive bombers, no torpedo bombers. And it's pretty obvious that the American loadout have some inherent problems. Now, it's not because it's an American carrier, it's more towards the fact that aircraft carriers have problems from the beginning. And not too long ago, I talked about this in another video where I was frustrated with the fact that Wargaming is taking a long time to fix carriers. And the biggest reason why is because the community doesn't get that much of attention in terms of trying to come together as a whole and pretty much gets Wargaming attention to fix this issue. And the fact that not many people play aircraft carriers don't have that motivation, which puts the aircraft carrier on the agenda as being the lowest priority compared to the battleships, destroyers, and cruisers. Now, in this case, I'm going to be expecting the Enterprise. Now, I'm guessing that there's going to be somewhat uniqueness to the Enterprise. Since she has tier 7 planes, and these two tier 7 planes will get pretty much obliterated by the Corsairs from the Lexington, I'm going to expect the Enterprise to have more planes in the sky compared to the 4 squadrons that you can control on the Lexington. I'm going to speculate that the Enterprise is going to be like the Ranger in terms of the fighter, is going to have the dive bombers in terms of the Lexington, and is going to have a loadout like the Essex, which is 1 fighter, 3 dive bombers, and 1 torpedo bomber, or having 3 fighters and 2 dive bombers, unless they also have the balanced default loadout, which I honestly see a lot of people use it because it's just more flexible, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really capitalize on the full effectiveness in terms of one particular role, which is a problem with the default loadout. So I'm going to be expecting her to be playing like the Essex with tier 7 fighters from the Ranger, and then tier 8 and with tier 8 dive bombers and also torpedo bombers from the Lexington, to balance the fact that the Enterprise will have the hangar capacity advantage. So that is my expectation. Now, my biggest hope from the Enterprise, aside from being excited as an American who's looking forward to their highest decorated ship, I am as excited as a Englishman when they first hear about the Warspite, because the Warspite is the highest decorated English or Royal Navy battleship from World War II. She fought World War II and World War I, and she continued her service until the end of the war, and somehow the British government decided to scrap the ship instead of making her into a museum ship. Same thing goes with the Enterprise. So, as much as I'm very excited for the ship as the American, and you get the idea. Same thing goes with all the other ships that people are looking forward to. There's still this problem that I have, and it still talks about my frustration with aircraft carriers. Aircraft carriers really need some rework, and I talked about this when Wargaming said that they weren't going to release new content for carriers in terms of premium ship until they fixed the carriers. There was no sign of it. But although I don't lose anything from the fact that if Wargaming is adding more carriers in this game, instead of being bothered by the fact that they still haven't really put the priority on reworking carriers, this is a good chance. The reason why I say this is a good chance is because if you play in the NA server, it's pretty obvious that aircraft carriers are unemployed. Like 1 to 10% of the games you play, like 10% will be carriers in the game, but other than that, most games you play in NA, you rarely see carriers. And judging from the fact that in the United States, a lot of people admire the Enterprise, and since not many people play carriers, I'm going to say that there's going to be a lot of people going to buy the Enterprise, even if they don't know how to play carriers. Now, yes, it sounds bad because there's going to be a lot of poor carrier players out there. But my greatest hope from this ship, not just having the ship in my dock, but the greatest hope is that it will bring the community together. And the reason why I say that is because this ship will force people to realize that aircraft carriers have problems. Like I said in my frustration video, the reason why Wargaming didn't put aircraft carrier rework as high, in terms of priority over the course of the years, because the carriers were broken for 2 years. 2 years, and people were just, walking down the street pretending like this is not a big problem, was because of the lack of aircraft carrier players, the lack of attention from the community on the aircraft carrier side. Now, like I was reading threads when I saw the thread about the Enterprise. I looked through the comments. I've seen some people who had never played carriers and definitely are interested in getting the carrier. If they can be exposed to carriers and possibly contribute to the overall community of aircraft carriers, there is a good chance that when Enterprise comes out and when enough people starts to try out carriers and feel what the position of aircraft carriers in general, maybe, just maybe, those people who are new to carriers will start to open their eyes and realize that carriers are broken in the sense of them being reworked to the point where they gotta fix the mechanics. It's just not buffing or nerfing ship. That is the point I'm trying to point here. To fix carriers, you can't just buff or nerf planes or ships or this. It's really the system. And I hope that if, for whatever reason, because it looks like the Enterprise won't be coming out anytime sooner because they're still got to get the Kaga and Hood out, I'm going to assume that down the road, if the Enterprise is, being sold when aircraft carriers are reworked, I think that'd be a perfect opportunity for the aircraft carrier community to get attention to get this thing fixed. In terms of the carriers in general, not just the Enterprise, because Enterprise is not the ship, guys. It's the system. That's what I'm trying to point out here. And like I said, not many people have experience with carriers. People think that carriers are just ships with planes on top of it. That is not true. There is a lot of ideas behind carriers. And in terms of this current state, yes, you can play carriers without a problem. I know this sounds really contradictory what I'm trying to point out here. You can play carriers without a problem. But the reason why there's a problem is because there's a lot of things that carriers should be able to do and also fix the balance of the game, which is where a lot of people get the complaint about aircraft carriers being underpowered, aircraft carriers being overpowered, and it just gets, very frustrating when you play games where people demand you to do something that you cannot do. For example, I talked about this in the frustration video. The SX only has one fighter. And when you play at the higher tier matchmaking, you get big maps like Tears of the Desert. If one ship is being picked up at flag A and your fighter is at C to protect your C fleet, you cannot do anything about it. That is a problem with carriers. I just wish there was, ways to split your fighters so you can spread out and scout for them. Currently, something like the Taiho, which I'm facing, does a better job than me because she has 2 fighter squadrons. She can split them and scout. That is just one of the fundamentals problems with aircraft carriers. There's no callouts for saying that, instead of saying SOS or requesting support, there's no call for requesting air support. So I can't tell who's being called out across the map. And that is just, just the tip of the iceberg. So in all, I'm looking forward to the Enterprise. I'm definitely looking forward to it because she is a ship that I'm looking forward in terms of one of the top 5 ships in the aircraft carrier category. Akagi, Kaga, Enterprise, Saratoga. There's a lot of aircraft carriers out there, and I'm looking forward to Wargaming releasing the Enterprise, but hopefully this sends a message as a whole to fixing aircraft carriers. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time on World of Warships.